"Do you even know what you're looking at, old man?" The voice, sharp with the arrogance of a fresh Ivy League degree, cut through the low hum of the auxiliary power. Kalen Vance, lead diagnostic engineer for the Triton project, gestured with a tablet at the silent monolithic engine core of the USS Vigilance. "This is a Series 7 magnetic hydrodynamic drive. It's not a lawnmower engine you can just kick back to life." Arthur Jenkins, 81 years old and clad in faded blue coveralls that had seen more sea time than Vance had seen birthdays, didn't answer. He simply stood before the colossal inert machine, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a ghost. His hands, gnarled and stained with the memory of 1,000 different oils, rested at his sides. He carried a small, worn leather satchel that looked like a relic from another century. Vance scoffed, turning to his team of 3 other engineers, all in matching crisp gray jumpsuits. They exchanged smirks. "Look, Admiral Rostova might have a soft spot for antiques," Vance continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "but we have a multi-billion-dollar warship dead in the water. We've run every diagnostic. The quantum computing models are all inconclusive. Whatever the problem is, it's beyond the scope of a wrench and a good guess." He eyed the leather satchel with disdain. "We don't need a mechanic, we need a physicist. So with all due respect, sir, if you're not here to serve coffee, you're in the way." Ensign Miller, a young officer tasked with escorting the old man, felt a hot flush of anger crawl up his neck. He stood by the engine room hatch, his crisp dress whites feeling starched and useless. He'd been given a direct order by the Admiral's office: bring Mr. Jenkins to the Vigilance, give him whatever he needs, and do not under any circumstances get in his way. He hadn't been prepared for this level of open hostility from the civilian contractors. The Vigilance was the pride of the fleet, a marvel of naval engineering, and for 3 agonizing days it had been a very expensive, very stationary pier ornament. The primary drive had simply stopped. No alarms, no explosions, just a quiet, baffling cessation of function. The team from Triton Dynamics, the corporation that had designed the drive, had been flown in on the 2nd day. Since then, they had filled the engine room with the sterile scent of ozone and the quiet clicks of their high-tech equipment. They had accomplished nothing. Now this old man, who looked more like he should be tinkering with a vintage car in his garage, stood as the fleet's last bizarre hope, and he was being mocked. "Mr. Vance," Ensign Miller said, his voice tighter than he intended. "Admiral Rostova's orders were clear. Mr. Jenkins is to be given full access." Vance shot him a withering look. "And her orders to me are to get this ship running. His presence here is counterproductive. He's a distraction. He's touching the housing," he said, aghast, as Arthur placed a palm flat against the cold metal of the drive's casing. The oils on his hand could contaminate the microsensors. "This is a clean environment." Arthur seemed not to hear him. He closed his eyes. His hand remained on the engine, a divining rod of flesh and bone. The entire space was a cathedral of modern technology. Fiber optic cables snaked in glowing bundles along the walls. Holographic displays flickered with streams of incomprehensible data, and in the center of it all was this quiet, unassuming man, performing an act of communion with a dead machine. The tension in the room thickened. The other engineers had stopped their work, now openly watching the confrontation. They looked at Arthur like he was a caveman trying to comprehend a smartphone. One of them, a woman with a severe haircut, whispered to her colleague, loud enough to be heard, "Is this for real? Did they bring in a witch doctor?" Arthur finally opened his eyes. He ignored the engineers completely, his gaze directed at the ensign. "I need my tools," he said. His voice was quiet, raspy with age, but carried a calm authority that cut through the tension. Ensign Miller nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Arthur knelt and unbuckled the leather satchel. The engineers watched, their expressions a mixture of morbid curiosity and utter disbelief. He didn't pull out a laser scanner or a sonic multimeter. Instead, he withdrew a long, slender piece of polished steel, no thicker than a pencil, with a simple bell-shaped cup on one end and a flat disc on the other. It looked like a primitive stethoscope. Vance actually laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle, it was a loud braying sound that echoed off the metal bulkheads. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me. What is that? Your magic wand?" Arthur held the instrument in his hand, his thumb stroking the worn metal. He looked at it, but his eyes saw something else entirely. The air in the engine room was suddenly thick with the smell of diesel and fear. The metal groaned around him, the unmistakable shriek of a submarine's hull under crushing depth pressure. He was 25 years old, a young petty officer deep in the black waters of the North Atlantic. An enemy destroyer was pinging them from above, bracketing them with depth charges. The blasts rattled their teeth, knocking out half the lights. The old diesel-electric engine on their boat, the USS Stingray, was screaming. A high-pitched whine that signaled a bearing was about to seize, a death sentence at this depth. The gauges were useless. needles vibrating wildly. But he had his listening rod, a tool given to him by his own Master Chief. He pressed it to the engine block, closing his eyes, shutting out the chaos. He ignored the shouts, the explosions, the terror. He listened, and through the cacophony, he heard it, a tiny off-key rhythmic click, a song of imperfection. He knew instantly which lubrication line had been crimped. He'd saved the boat and its crew of 84 men. The listening rod in his hand wasn't a tool, it was a part of his soul. He blinked, the memory receding, leaving only the sterile hum of the Vigilance's auxiliary power and the lingering echo of Vance's mockery. He ignored the man and turned back to the silent engine. He placed the disc end of the rod against the housing and pressed the cup to his ear. Ensign Miller watched, transfixed. He saw the condescending sneers on the faces of the Triton team, saw Vance roll his eyes and turn back to his tablet, pointedly dismissing the old man. The disrespect was galling, a physical insult to the quiet dignity Arthur projected. Miller thought of the Admiral's urgent, almost reverent tone when she had given him the assignment. She knew something about this man that these arrogant contractors couldn't possibly comprehend. He felt a surge of protective duty. This wasn't right. He backed away slowly toward the hatch, pulling his comms device from his belt. He couldn't call the Admiral directly. That wasn't protocol, but he could call her flag lieutenant. He ducked out of the engine room, the heavy hydraulic door hissing shut behind him. "Lieutenant Commander Reyes, this is Ensign Miller on the Vigilance," he whispered into the device. "Miller, what is it? Is Mr. Jenkins aboard?" The lieutenant's voice was tense. "Yes, sir. He's in the main engine room now. But, sir, the civilian contractors are giving him a hard time. It's incredibly disrespectful, sir. They're mocking him. The lead engineer, Vance, is treating him like he's senile." There was a moment of dead silence on the other end of the line. When Reyes spoke again, his voice was dangerously cold. "Say again, Ensign. They are mocking him." "Yes, sir. Openly. Calling him an old man, laughing at his tools." Another pause, this one longer. Miller could hear muffled, urgent voices in the background. Then Reyes was back. "Ensign, maintain your post. Keep your eyes on Mr. Jenkins. Help is on the way." The line went dead. Miller stared at his device, a shiver running down his spine. The words "help is on the way" seemed oddly out of proportion. Help for whom? The old man? Or for the smug engineers who had no idea what kind of hornet's nest they had just kicked? He slipped the comms device back onto his belt and pushed the hatch open again, stepping back into the theater of quiet conflict. Aboard the Naval Base headquarters 5 miles across the bay, Lieutenant Commander Reyes burst into the Admiral's office without knocking. "Admiral, I just got off the comm with Ensign Miller on the Vigilance." Admiral Eva Rostova looked up from a stack of reports, her expression severe. "What is it? Is Arthur okay?" "He's fine, ma'am. He's in the engine room. But the Triton Dynamics team, they're ridiculing him. The lead engineer called him an old man and laughed at his equipment." The Admiral's face, already etched with the stress of the situation, hardened into a mask of cold fury. She stood up, her chair scraping back harshly. She walked to the large window overlooking the naval yard, her gaze locking on the distant, motionless silhouette of the USS Vigilance. "They are mocking the ghost of the fleet," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The name hung in the air. It wasn't an official title. It was a legend, whispered in engine rooms and chiefs' messes across the entire Navy. It belonged to a man who could walk onto a ship, listen to its soul, and fix what no one else could. A man who had saved the carrier USS Independence from a catastrophic fire by diagnosing a faulty valve by the smell of the air in a single corridor. A man who had jury-rigged a desalination unit on a frigate with nothing but a coffee pot and some copper wire, saving its crew from dying of thirst in the Indian Ocean. A man who had done it all without computers, without fanfare, and who had retired into quiet obscurity decades ago. "Reyes," the Admiral said, turning from the window, her eyes blazing. "Get me the captain of the Vigilance on a secure line, now, and scramble my personal transport. We're paying a visit." Back in the engine room, Arthur was oblivious to the storm he had inadvertently unleashed. He moved methodically around the massive engine, a physician examining a patient. He'd press the listening rod to a spot, close his eyes for a long moment, then move on. He didn't seem to be getting any results. Kalen Vance's patience, already thin, finally snapped. He strode over to Arthur, his face a mask of indignation. "That's it. I'm calling this. You're done." He got right in the old man's personal space. "My team can't work with this theatrical nonsense. It's a security risk. It's a waste of time. I am officially lodging a complaint with the Navy." "Ensign," he snapped, pointing a finger at Miller, "escort this man off the ship. We'll have security meet you at the gangway." Given his apparent confusion, I think a full medical evaluation might be in order." It was the final insult, the ultimate overreach, threatening to have a man like Arthur Jenkins, a man personally requested by an admiral, forcibly removed and subjected to a competency hearing, was an act of supreme career-ending arrogance. Ensign Miller stepped forward, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm on his belt, a purely reflexive gesture of defiance. "Sir, you will stand down. My orders are from Admiral Rostova, and my contract is with the Department of the Navy." Vance shot back. "This ship is my responsibility until that engine is on. Get him out of here, or I will have you all charged with obstructing a critical defense operation." Before Miller could respond, a new sound cut through the tension. It wasn't the sound of the engine. It was the sharp, piercing tone of the ship-wide general quarters alarm, followed immediately by the captain's voice over the 1MC, the ship's public address system. The captain's voice was strained, tight with a new and unfamiliar panic. "All hands, attention on deck. This is the captain. Stand by for the arrival of the commander, Naval Surface Forces. I say again, Admiral Rostova is coming aboard. All department heads, report to the primary gangway, on the double, honor guard to the quarterdeck. Move." A stunned silence fell over the engine room. Vance's face went pale. The commander of Naval Surface Forces, the 3-star admiral in charge of the entire surface fleet, was coming here. Now, it made no sense. A visit like that was planned for weeks, not announced with a panicked ship-wide alarm. The distant but unmistakable thumping of a Black Hawk helicopter grew rapidly louder, vibrating through the ship's hull. It was followed by the squeal of tires on the pier below. Vance looked from the ensign to the old man, a flicker of dawning horror in his eyes. He still didn't understand, but the tectonic plates of power were shifting beneath his feet, and he was on the wrong side of the fault line. Arthur, for his part, seemed not to have noticed. He had found something. He was holding the listening rod against a small, insignificant-looking junction box low on the engine's port side. His eyes were closed, and for the first time, a small, knowing smile touched his lips. He'd heard it. The ghost in the machine had finally spoken to him. The hatch to the engine room burst open. It wasn't an honor guard. It was the ship's captain himself, a man with 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, his face ashen. He was followed by a formidable figure in a crisp black uniform, 3 silver stars glittering on her collar. Admiral Rostova swept into the room, her eyes scanning the scene with the force of a targeting laser. Her gaze fell on Vance and his team, then on Ensign Miller, and finally, it settled on Arthur. The fury in her expression instantly melted away, replaced by something else entirely, profound, unequivocal respect. She strode past the petrified engineers as if they were inanimate objects. She walked directly to the old man, who was now slowly straightening up, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. She stopped 2 feet in front of him, drew herself up to her full height, and executed a perfect razor-sharp salute. "Master Chief Jenkins," she said, her voice ringing with authority and reverence. "It is an honor to have you aboard." The title hung in the air, a bombshell. Master Chief Petty Officer, the highest enlisted rank in the Navy. Vance and his team stared, their jaws slack. This shambling old man in greasy coveralls was a legendary Master Chief. The captain standing behind the Admiral winced as if he'd been struck. He knew the name, of course. Every sailor did. The Admiral kept her salute held, her eyes locked on Arthur's. "I apologize for the reception you've received from these contractors," she said, her voice dropping an octave, each word a chip of ice. She turned her head slightly, her gaze pinning Kalen Vance to the bulkhead. "Mr. Vance, is it?" Vance could only manage a choked, gurgling sound. "This is Master Chief Petty Officer Arthur Jenkins, retired," the Admiral announced to the room, though her eyes never left Vance. "He is known by those of us who have had the privilege of serving with him as the ghost of the fleet. In his 40 years of service, he has saved more ships and more lives than any computer model you could ever design. The listening rod you so openly mocked was used to pinpoint a failing engine bearing on the submarine USS Stingray while it was being hunted by Soviet destroyers in 1968, saving all 84 souls aboard. He single-handedly restored power to the USS Saratoga during a typhoon in the South China Sea, using his knowledge of steam dynamics, a feat 3 separate engineering committees later deemed theoretically impossible. This man has forgotten more about naval engines than you and your entire company will ever know." The crowd of sailors that had gathered at the hatch, drawn by the commotion, stared in awe. They were looking at a living legend. Vance looked like he was about to be physically sick. His multi-million-dollar contract, his reputation, his entire career was evaporating before his eyes. Arthur finally returned the Admiral's salute with a slow, slightly stiff movement. "Admiral," he said softly. Good to see you again, Eva. You can put your hand down. You'll scare the children. A few of the sailors at the hatch stifled a laugh. The Admiral dropped her salute, a small smile finally breaking through her stern facade. Did you find it, Art? Aye, Arthur said, tapping the small junction box with his finger. I did. Mr. Vance, the Admiral said, her voice once again hard as steel. You and your team are to gather your equipment and vacate this ship immediately. Your contract with Triton Dynamics is under formal review for termination. Ensign Miller will escort you to the gangway. She turned to the ship's captain. Captain, I want a full report on this incident on my desk by 0800 tomorrow, and I want to know why my direct orders regarding Mr. Jenkins were not followed to the letter. The captain swallowed hard. Yes, Admiral. Vance and his team, utterly broken, began to pack their things in a humiliated silence. The Admiral turned her back on them, giving her full attention to Arthur. What was it, Master Chief? Arthur looked at the junction box. It's not the drive, he said, his voice calm and instructive. The drive is fine. It's the power relay. There's a harmonic imbalance. The new solid-state relays they use are too perfect. They can't handle the minute frequency drift from the ship's main power bus when it's under load. The system reads it as a catastrophic failure and triggers a safety shutdown. But there's no actual failure, so it doesn't throw a code. The computer is chasing its own tail. He opened a small flap on the junction box. Inside was a gleaming, high-tech relay chip. These engineers, he said, not with malice but with a teacher's patience. They only look at the data. They don't listen to the machine. They hear silence and think nothing is wrong. But there is a sound in the silence, a vibration that doesn't belong. He looked at Vance, who had paused his packing to listen, his face a mess of shame and disbelief. A machine has a rhythm, son, a heartbeat. Your problem is you're trying to perform surgery with a spreadsheet. Sometimes all you need to do is listen. He reached into his leather satchel again and pulled out a small, simple object, a tiny copper coil wrapped around a ferrite core, something that looked like it belonged in a 1950s radio. This will fix it, he said. He handed the makeshift part to a nearby Navy machinist's mate. Solder this onto the input line for the relay. It'll act as a buffer. Smooth out the frequency drift before it hits the chip. As the machinist got to work, Arthur looked down at the old listening rod still in his hand. The memory was sharp and clear. He was a raw recruit, barely 19. His own mentor, a leathery old master chief named Gus, had pressed the tool into his hand on his first day in the engine room. The new kids will laugh at this, Gus had told him, his voice a gravelly whisper over the roar of the engines. They'll trust their fancy dials and their gauges, but computers lie. Dials break. The machine always tells the truth, Art. You just have to learn how to listen. He had never forgotten those words. The rod was more than steel. It was a legacy. Within minutes, the machinist's mate gave a thumbs up. It's in, Master Chief. Arthur nodded. All right, Captain. Tell your bridge to bring the drive online. Gently. The order was relayed. A tense silence filled the engine room. Then a low hum began to build. It was a clean, powerful sound, growing steadily in pitch and volume. The holographic displays, which had been showing flat lines, bloomed with cascading green data. The deck plates began to vibrate with a steady, powerful thrum. The USS Vigilance was alive. A cheer erupted from the sailors at the hatch. Admiral Rostova beamed, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder. You're still the best there ever was, Art. Arthur just gave a small, tired nod. His work was done. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. The Triton Dynamics contract was officially terminated. Kalen Vance was fired, his spectacular failure becoming a cautionary tale among defense contractors. Admiral Rostova, true to her word, instituted a new mandatory training module for all naval engineering personnel, titled Applied Mechanical Diagnostics, which was based entirely on Arthur Jenkins' principles of sensory analysis. It was unofficially known as the Ghosts Method. A formal letter of apology from the CEO of Triton Dynamics was delivered to Arthur's quiet suburban home. He read it, folded it neatly, and used it to level a wobbly leg on his workbench. 3 months later, Kalen Vance was working a far less glamorous job, supervising quality control at a commercial turbine factory. The pay was a fraction of what he used to make, but it was honest work. One afternoon, he stopped at a small local diner for lunch. As he sat at the counter, he saw a familiar figure sitting in a booth by the window, slowly enjoying a piece of apple pie. It was Arthur Jenkins. Vance's heart pounded. He could have just walked out, but he didn't. He slid off the stool and walked over to the booth. Arthur looked up, his eyes showing no malice, only mild curiosity. Mr. Jenkins, Vance said, his voice quiet and humbled. I just wanted to apologize for my behavior on the Vigilance. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. What you did, it taught me a lesson I'll never forget." Arthur looked at him for a long moment, then gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "Sit down, son," he said. He flagged down the waitress. "Get this young man a cup of coffee." He looked back at Vance, a faint, forgiving smile on his face. "The first step to learning how to listen to a machine," he said, "is learning how to listen to people." If you were inspired by the story of Master Chief Arthur Jenkins, please like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of quiet heroes.